Thank you for joining us for this seminar with Professor Dadabaev and Dr. Mukaddam Akhmedova. This seminar is a part of the special lecture and discussion series, which Professor Dadabaev will talk more about shortly. But first, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Nafissa Insebayeva, and I will be moderating today's event. I serve as a researcher at the Nippon Foundation Central Asia Japan Human Resource Development Project, and I specialize in international development cooperation, Kazakhstan's foreign policy. Before we proceed, I'd like everyone in attendance know that this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded online. So if you wish to keep your cameras and microphones off, you are welcome to do so. After the speakers deliver their 20-minute presentations each, you will be invited to ask questions for which you can either use the raise your hand button on Zoom, or you can type your questions into the chat box and I will read them out loud. And since we want the speakers to be able to answer as many questions as possible, please keep your questions and comments short. So without further ado, Professor Dadabaev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome to this event those of you who are not part of the program. My name is Timur Dadabaev, and I am a professor of international relations at the University of Tsukuba. I also have a privilege to direct the special program for Central Asian countries. And we've partnered with Nippon Foundation, which is perhaps one of the most prominent funding institutions in Japan and internationally in regards to the Central Eurasia in general, but also the issues of development. So I would like to thank Nippon Foundation for this opportunity. As a program, we thought of establishing the Central Eurasian Studies in East Asia and beyond lecture series. The idea that we had in mind during our discussions was that there is a lot of knowledge being generated in East Asia on Central Eurasia, but there are very few platforms available to make this knowledge available to the international community of scholars. And so we thought that as a program, which is perhaps the largest program on Central Eurasia in Japan, we would be an appropriate venue to host this kind of events. Today we start with this pre-publication seminar on the book that we've written recently. However, the series are going to follow in the next few weeks. We follow with the lecture by Dr. Suinat Sultanaliyeva, who is also the graduate from the University of Tsukuba. She received her PhD a few years ago, and she is currently an officer with Human Rights Watch. And she will discuss this, reframing on non-Western feminism. Followed in February by a lecture by Professor Hama of Shizuoka Kenritsu, it's a prefectural university in Shizuoka. She focuses on neo-Eurasianism and Russia's vision of the international order, a very topical issue in light of recent developments. On February 14th, we're going to have Professor Uyama, who is one of the well, perhaps the most leading scholar and thinker of Central Asian affairs in Japan, and he is going to discuss the the balancing between West centrism and nationalism in Central Asian studies internationally. And we will conclude in February with the talk by Professor Sonoda from the University of Tokyo, who is going to share with us his late findings of the student survey on the views of Central Eurasian students in respect to East Asia. This is the general lineup of the talks, and in terms of speakers, we attempted to invite the speakers who have certain findings from their fieldwork, and so the talks and invitations were extended based on this criteria that these people are involved in first-hand knowledge generation on Central Asia. And for the lineup until the February, we have these speakers. In March and after April, we will have additional speakers on which we're going to announce separately. So So talking about today's presentation, so it's about the book that we're publishing from Palgrave, titled "The Grass is Always Greener: Unpacking Uzbek Migration to Japan." Now, it's published as a part of the Palgrave series on politics and history in Central Asia. The first book out of this series was intended to be a single volume on Japan in Central Asia. And this is perhaps one of the first, if not the first, book on Japanese foreign policy in Central Asia, published in 2016. Given its interest to it, the Palgrave offered us to actually host a series of books on Central Asia, and the one that is going to be presented today is part of it. Among the latest books in this series, we do have the book on modernity, development, and decolonization of knowledge in Central Asia, authored by Dr. Nafissa Insebayeva, who is moderating this session. And we are hoping to be able to host a separate event for that book. So we invite you to familiarize yourself with the series of these books. We do have plans to publish 3 more books from this series for this year, with more proposals coming in. So please visit the website of the series. In terms of our today's book, the puzzle that we attempted to deal with was the following. There is a considerable amount of studies on migration from Central Asia to Russia, Turkey, Middle East, and other parts of the world. However, at the same time, we do see an increasing migration flows coming from Central Asia to Japan and also South Korea in recent years. But very few studies actually pay attention to these flows. And so we wanted to properly acknowledge, narrate, and then contextualize the migration flows from Central Asia to East Asia. So that was one thing that we wanted to accomplish. The second thing was that the coverage of migration in recent years is published internationally, very often focuses on the notions of danger. And as such, it securitizes the notion of migration, securitizes it both in terms of host communities and sending communities. And so, our book actually attempts to go beyond the securitization dilemma and attempt to unpack the different factors which lie behind the migration flows from Central Asia to East Asia. The focus of the book is Uzbek community in Japan, and for us, it was not a brainer really in choosing to focus on Uzbek community, because if you look at the data available, one would realize that out of the Central Asian countries, residents of Central Asian countries, those who currently reside in Japan are dominated by Uzbek community. We have around 4,000 people residing in Japan from Uzbekistan, and out of them, 3,000 are male and around 1,000 are female. In terms of their legal status, their majority are international students, followed by those who are engaged in various types of labor and their dependents. And so the book, in that particular sense, uses Uzbek community to depict, the challenges and issues that Central Asians face when traveling to East Asian destinations, as exemplified by the case of Japan. In terms of chapter outline, this book project has been actively sort of assisted and co-authored with my former students and my colleagues now, Dr. Mukaddam Akhmedova, who is my co-panelist today, and Dr. Jasur Soipov, who is also working on the issues of labor and educational migration from Uzbekistan to Japan, and who is currently a researcher with the Nippon Foundation Central Asia program. In terms of chapter outlines, we firstly, in the first chapter, outlined the puzzle and the issues that we're dealing with, followed by presenting the snapshot of the migrants from Uzbekistan to Japan and South Korea, as these are two major destinations in East Asia from Central Asia. In chapter 3, we focused on the Uzbek newcomers to the Japanese educational institutions, which then moved to the labor market. Chapter 4 focused on the issues of identity and sojourning. Chapter 5 focused on gender issues, because we do realize that the migration experiences are different depending on the gender. Ethnicity, religious attachments are dealt with in chapter 6. Chapter 7 focuses exclusively on Japanese language schools and how they became the most attractive institutions for Uzbek students. Chapter 8 then looks in general into how student mobility turns into the labor migration from Uzbekistan to Japan. So this is the chapter outline of the book. The main questions that we attempted to answer through this book is the following. What are the features of intensifying educational mobility and labor migration from Central Asia, as exemplified by the case of Uzbekistan, to Japan in recent years? While the question is very specific, the larger question that we are trying to address and deal with is what are the social factors that play important roles in migration flows and settlement practices of Central Asian migrants to East Asia. So essentially, the book is an attempt to contribute to answering this second question, this bigger question. Methodologically, we do realize that the Uzbek community in Japan is rather diverse. So in that sense, our sample has twofold structure. On the one hand, we look into higher skilled migrants, such as graduate students and postgraduate employees. On the other hand, we also cover a rather big group of people of lower skilled migrants. We started with the Japanese language schools, and later on we moved to interviews with people who actually found jobs in the Japanese labor market after their studies in the Japanese language school. The first sample is rather small. It's around 30 people. The second sample, the second sample is still ongoing. So in this book, we use interviews from around 70 people, but we are hopeful that by the end of our survey, we will have around 300 interviewees or respondents from the second sample. In all of these cases, we used face-to-face interviews. And then, these are either online or in person. Now, the main findings. I will only focus upon the findings that we did not anticipate to have when we started this project. And I invite everyone to actually read the book when it's published, if you would like to familiarize yourself with the details. Now, the first finding that surprised us to a great extent is that migration literature quite often treats migrants as individuals who are aspiring to move to certain destinations and build their lives there permanently. In our case, it was quite surprising to find that majority of our respondents consider their stay in Japan to be temporary. There were almost no respondents who would indicate that they want to move and stay in Japan forever. Now, the second finding that we found quite interesting is that migration literature quite often treats migration and migration destinations as fixed concepts, as the concepts which are defined by migrants from the beginning. So they want to move to US, they want to move to Turkey, and they provide different reasoning for why these individuals choose their locations. Our sample actually demonstrates that migrants do not necessarily have did not necessarily have Japan as the primary destination of their migration. Eventually, they came to choose Japan out of the choice of Russia, Korea, their own home country, as a sort of considering advantages and disadvantages of other locations. So in that sense, it sends us the message that migration destination by itself is a very fluid concept, which is not defined by the advantages of a particular country, but it also subject to consideration or to analysis of disadvantages and advantages presented elsewhere. And that leads me to the third point that, in many cases, our respondents, they consider their prospects depending on their opportunities elsewhere. So when choosing on Japan, it was not Japan per se which attracted them. It was put in their mind in comparative perspective when deciding on where to go. And it's quite interesting that within our survey sample, we did have few respondents who actually experienced Russia, Korea, and other destinations before they have selected Japan. And at the same time, we do have in our sample individuals who indicated that after Japan, they would like to move to other destinations. So it's a constant sort of process of decision-making in their mind, and it's not a very simple, clear-cut sort of decision to make, when they decide on where to go. The fourth point that we would like to emphasize is the point of return. Migration literature quite often depicts migrants as those who leave their home countries and they connect their future and their plans with their destination. In our case, in the majority of cases, and I think that has to do with the sample, because we have young, very mobile sample. Majority of our respondents connected their migration plans and their migration experience to the notion of return. So for them, a return is an important criteria when they decide where to go, if they need to go, and what kind of activity they want to get engaged when they are going. To exemplify this, depending on the type of activity that these people plan to engage after their return, their pattern of behavior in Japan differs significantly. There would be certain individuals who connect their future after their return with private sector, with opening a company. So these individuals do not engage too much in educational activities. They spend almost all of their time for accumulating financial gains so that this money can then be used for their activities back home. Then you have other individuals who connect their future with academic community or with public service, and these individuals do not spend so much effort on accumulating financial rewards. For them, accumulating knowledge and accumulating certain skills that would give them a special status on their return is more important. So this issue of return is very significant in the discussions of our sample, and we thought that this the notion of return is not properly acknowledged in the migration literature. The fifth point is the notion of sojourn, and I'm pretty sure my co-panelist, Dr. Mukaddam Akhmedova, is going to talk about this, but we utilize this notion of sojourn or temporary stay as the theoretical platform to narrate the current residence of these individuals in Japan. And their current stay in Japan is not defined by time or by visa type. The migration literature actually always refers to the terms of the stay or terms of the time as the indication of the intention of individuals to stay. In our case, we had certain individuals who had the opportunity to permanently stay or even apply for citizenship, but they didn't. Or even if considering applying, they didn't consider their stay in Japan to be permanent. And the other way around, we had individuals who had very limited amount of time permitted to them by their visa, but this was not considered by them as an indication that they don't have opportunities to stay if they wished. It was more related to their ethnic connections that they wanted to retain. The sixth point is about discrimination. The migration literature on Japan, if you read it, quite often refers to this issue of discrimination, that foreigners are discriminated, it's very difficult to integrate with the Japanese community. And that's the reason why foreigners come here and stay for a certain period of time and they return. In our sample, it was quite surprising that discrimination against non-Japanese, which features in other studies, does not display itself in our findings. And we believe that this has to do with the notion of differentiation in Uzbek society, where you have representatives of a great number of ethnic groups who differentiate between each other. And for them, this differentiation is a normal thing. And well, in Japan, they are differentiated. They are not necessarily discriminated, but they are differentiated from the Japanese community. And so they, our sample respondents, they consider this differentiation to be a normal thing, because in their own words, they don't want to become Japanese, and they don't want any Japanese to become Uzbek either. So for them, distinguishing ethnic groups and expecting different patterns of behavior is a very natural thing. So they do not consider this to be a discrimination, and they do not consider this to be the reason for leaving. And the final point is desire of social remittances. Our former graduate, Dr. Rajabov, has written a manuscript comparing the social remittances in Japan and Germany. In our survey, we did find a great desire for accumulation of social remittances. We did not have too many examples yet, and I think that's another frontier for us to find applicable examples of social remittances. But what was quite obvious is that type of the knowledge accumulated in Japan is considered by many of our respondents to be the wealth that they can use on their return, aside from financial rewards that they can accumulate in Japanese society. So these are the general outline of our findings of this book. I'll return the floor to Nafissa, and I'm looking forward for your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think the book covers a wide range of issues which inspire a lot of questions, so I look forward to the Q&A session. Now I would like to invite Dr. Mukaddam Akhmedova, who graduated from the special program for Central Eurasian countries here at the University of Tsukuba. And her research collaboration with Professor Dadabaev was published in Eurasian Studies recently, so you can check out that manuscript. And apart from her research activities, Dr. Akhmedova is also actively engaged in IT consulting. So Dr. Akhmedova, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nafissa, for introducing me. So my name is Mukaddam, and I'm going to be presenting a few findings from the book. Please give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about challenges in data collection for our samples, and talking about ethnicity and role of ethnicity in migration in navigating life in Japan for our Uzbekistani respondents, and gender's mobility. So let me start with introducing our research participants. So we chose methodologically semi-structured interviews for the research, and we chose this for chapters 4 to 6 in the book. And the reason for this is to explore the human side of our of the lives of Uzbekistani residents and migrants in Japan. as much as possible to learn their story, to learn how the processes of sojourning to settling, how the transitions took place. So we conducted 30 interviews, and I tried as much as possible to select the equal number of men and women respondents for the research, but as you have seen from Professor Dadabaev's statistical graphs from a while ago, that the number, the percentage of men and women residing in Japan has a huge gap. I'm going to be talking about it later. So we, due to that, also we have 17 men and 13 women respondents. And the visa status of our respondents range from international student visa, which is the largest percentage of visa types for Uzbekistani residents. Work types of working visas, such as engineering, international services, professor, and so on and so forth for work visas, and then dependents of work visa holders, permanent residents, and dependents of permanent residents. And as Professor Dadabaev mentioned, we had face-to-face interviews, and all of them were either online or in-person interviews. And for online calls, we utilized applications such as Skype, Facebook Messenger, Line, email, or whatever that worked for our respondents. And as for length of residency, the range was from 5 months to 13 years. And the reason for the shortest length was the recommendation by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan, which recommends for Uzbekistani residents to register at embassies of Uzbekistan in respective foreign countries from 6 months of residence. And if we look at where our participants are from, originally in Uzbekistan, the participants are mainly from the eastern part of Uzbekistan. And 11 participants were from Tashkent, 8 from Namangan, and 5 from Andijan, 2 from Sirdarya, and 1 from Samarkand. And 10 respondents were born in Tashkent, and 14 respondents they grew up in cities, and 5 more were from towns and villages. And throughout the study, the locations, the origins of our respondents are anonymized, since we promised confidentiality of our respondents. And as for Japan, the participants were based at the time of interviews in Ibaraki, 15 persons, Tokyo, 10 persons, Fukuoka 2, Aichi 1, Gifu 1, and Osaka 1 as well. And 7 out of 10 of Tokyo residents mentioned that they lived in other prefectures prior to moving to Tokyo. And as for challenges during data collection, the major challenge, of course, is connecting to potential respondents and connecting to respondents during the interviews. And the major one in this, for me, was trust issues, winning trust from the respondent, because due to the past of Uzbekistan, although it was 2018, there were still suspicions and worries about my affiliation, and lots of potential respondents were worried if I was really affiliated with the university, if I was really doing research, and lots of times the notion of being potentially spied by secret agency popped up, and sometimes respondents agreed to participate in the project while bringing up the secret agency topic. For example, saying like, "Oh, probably you're not the secret agent, right? I'll take part then," and things like that. So that was one of the major points that kept recurring. And second was signing the consent forms. And I realized that if I give the participants the printed consent forms, if the participants weren't in my acquaintanceship circle, it created suspicion, and sometimes they rejected participating in the interview. And I started thinking if there are any other alternatives. And I thought that I could just send, as I was sending the consent forms beforehand, before the interview, when I was contacting the respondents, and try to voice record respondents' consents right before the interview, and it worked better. So my realization was that the more serious and physical in terms of paperwork it gets, the more suspicion it's created. So I thought that I could share that for those who are doing in-person interviews as well. And another thing is on being a female researcher. As you might know, Uzbekistan is kind of patriarchal in terms of how the society runs. And sometimes I got either inappropriate sexist comments from potential respondents, which I'm not talking, which I won't probably be talking about, or ageist comments during the interview, which I had to deal with and try to get back to what the interview was about. And to carry on, so as Professor Dadabaev mentioned, there's a gap between men and women residents, Uzbekistani residents in Japan. And for 2018, there were 80% men and 20% women. And this was discussed and brought up by female respondents, although it wasn't the focus of discussions during the time when we created interview questions. They kept mentioning about prioritization of men in the society, prioritization of male children when they were growing up, how their brothers or cousins were going abroad, and how they were thinking that they would also go abroad, study, live just like them, but they weren't sure. And I thought that that's one of the reasons why there's this gap between men and women in Japan. And as for women, female respondents' experiences, women demonstrated gender bias in the experience of mobility in Japan, and I believe it can be applied for any other country too. And they explained it by limitations from their parents or from societal expectations. For example, one of them was marriage, how marriage affected their plans of stay in Japan, making their non-sojourning plans of stay in Japan to reluctant returnees, which is those people who would like to settle for longer, but they had to, against their will, go back. So, for example, as mentioned by one of the respondents, Nafissa, was that she went to Uzbekistan because her parents wanted her to return to Uzbekistan as the marital situation demanded. Since she's a girl, she needed to get married. And this is all sad, told with sad sentiments, but also acceptance that this is how things are in the society by respondents. Or another example of escape from societal expectations is mentioned by Tamara. She didn't have concrete plans regarding Japan, but after all, she decided not to return to Uzbekistan because of her sexual orientation, that she wouldn't be able to live freely in Uzbekistan. Or another example would be our respondent Tahmina, who escaped arranged marriage situation, which didn't let her work at all in Uzbekistan, and she decided to divorce and migrate to Japan. And compared to male respondents, we don't see these trends. And the next, I'm going to be talking about musafirchilik. So musafir in Uzbek actually means someone who goes to some stranger situation, location, for a temporary stay and goes back as an experienced person. So basically, as we found out from the interviews with our respondents, sojourning itself was a culturally sensitive category for Uzbekistani migrants in Japan. And for discussion of musafirchilik, we turn to the group of Japanese language students, because it was emphasized more in that group of our respondents. However, it is not limited to only that category of residents. You don't really have to go and talk about experiences in Japan to Uzbekistani residents. Even if you talk about something really easy and casual, there always is something mentioning musafirchilik. Something like, we're all musafir in this country, which also gives you the notion of the orientation towards Japan, that we're here temporarily and we will leave sometime later, even if we're holding permanent residency and so on. So going back to Japanese language students, so the background of this group is that most of them in my research sample, they came to Japan having a great deal of debt back at home. And they were promised that they'll have a flexible schedule in Japan. They will earn enough money to cover their debts as soon as possible in a couple of months. And they could just focus on their studies, which wasn't the case for them. And they realized it soon after they came to Japan, which also kind of strengthened their religious orientation. They all mentioned that they prayed 5 times per day. They started praying 5 times per day after coming to Japan and learning about their hardships that are ahead of them. And they were all operating using Islamic terms. So they were rationalizing their experience of living in Japan as a test, passing which they would go home and they would be wiser. And as it's emphasized by Jawahar here, he says that he's gaining life experiences in Japan. And there's an Uzbek saying that you cannot be a Muslim without being a Musafir, and that he's learning a great lesson of life experiences for himself in life. So that was the main striking finding that we found, that we discovered in our samples. And the last thing I'm going to talk about today is Uzbekchilik. It's ethnicity in navigating life in Japan. I'm sorry. So Uzbekchilik, to say it shortly, is a set of rules which judge the Uzbek belonging. And here, if we look at literature of foreign migrants in Japan, we can see that lots of it deals with racism, discrimination towards the foreigners, and we don't see it really when we talk to Uzbekistani in Japan, because it seems like it's not new for Uzbek residents, because of the background of growing up in Uzbekistan, where the society is not homogeneous. And if we compare to Japanese notion, essentialist notion, which shows Japan as a unique nation, Uzbekchilik kind of recognizes others due to multiculturality, but still otherizes them. And so, for example, if you ask Uzbek respondents about how the adaptation is going or has been going, they would talk about, I don't know, adapting to Japanese cuisine or things like that are really basic daily things and no cultural things that much. Or, for example, they would mention about difficulties in making friends with Japanese, and right after that mention, but there are others, so I would understand. And as for this balance in literature, I think also we should recognize here the majority of literature is on Caucasian sample of English speakers. And I think in that sense, our research makes a good step towards showing non-English speaking and non-Caucasian sample. That's it for my from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akhmedova. Now I would like to open the floor for any questions. Once again, you can either type them into the chat box or you can raise your hand or unmute your mic. I think actually, oh, we have one question from Gunai.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a question regarding the finding that majority of the respondents indicated they would like to stay in Japan for a short while. And as I understood, this survey and interviews were conducted before pandemic. It was 2018. And I would like to hear, do you have any insights regarding the pandemic period, regarding the Japanese government's policy towards foreigners, where people cannot invite their family members, like dependent or new foreigners cannot enter Japan? And do you think that if this survey or interview was conducted during the pandemic, the answers would be skewed more towards like not staying in Japan because of the government's policy? This would be my question.
Thank you, Gunai.
Yeah, let me just take that. Shall we collect maybe?
Yes, if this is more convenient, let's collect all questions that we have so far. And then while our speakers are answering them, you can come up with more questions. We have a question from Professor Insebayeva.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have a question regarding the interviews. So we know that replies to interviews or survey questions are not always truthful or accurate. So many people, especially from Central Asia, tend to show a distinct courtesy bias. Like there is a tendency to give polite or socially desirable answers. So even if you are a bad cook, people from Central Asia would normally never say so. So I'm wondering, how did you overcome that and ensure the reliability of your data? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Insebayeva. I have one more question in the chat box from one of the participants. Do you have information about what the respondents do for the living? Did you consider economical reasons regarding migration? I think we can take these three questions.
Okay, so let me start, and then maybe Mukaddam is going to add to this, right? So the first question about the Japanese when the surveys have been conducted. Parts of them they've started before the pandemic, and with the the second sample, which focuses on Japanese language schools, we went into the pandemic. So it's a mixture of pre-pandemic and the pandemic time interviews. Now, in terms of how much of the Japanese government's policies influence this desire not to stay for longer, is really difficult to answer because, firstly, actually for some of the respondents, pandemic played in favor of staying because they utilized, especially those who wanted to stay a little longer and who wanted to work a little longer, but their visa status did not permit them to do so. They could actually go to the immigration services, and their visas were extended for 1 month or 2 months, and sometimes they would get these extensions by days even, and they used this loophole to prolong their stay, their temporary stay. And the idea was that they actually wanted to benefit from this pandemic in order to work a little bit longer. Now, it's not included into this sample, but we have very interesting data coming in, which actually shows that pandemic does not necessarily hurt these people financially. meaning that, we have, I am not yet prepared to talk about in detail, but we have certain data which shows that, for certain types of jobs, the income actually has increased due to pandemic. And so the relation between pandemic and the temporality of the stay, or the pandemic and the desire of the stay, is not direct. It's very complex, depending on what kind of work one is engaged in, and what kind of activities one is doing. The second question about how do we make sure that the results are truthful? And we are not looking into whether it is truthful or not. We do realize, there is a great deal of subjectivity in the respondents, in the responses. And I think it's okay to be subjective, because what we want to do is to trace that subjectivity, to trace what people feel, or the way they want to represent their feelings. And there were a few examples when we clearly knew that the income that they reported having was much lower than they were actually having, because this information is available not only from their interviews, but also from different social networking sites, and they publicize how much one can earn and in what kind of jobs they can work. So that kind of data can be sort of traced and checked for the truthfulness. But in terms of intentions, in terms of feelings in respect to the other group, the idea was to look into the subjectivities and reflect on subjectivities more. And I think this is very important, because quite often we do make assumptions on certain phenomena without actually giving these people a voice to speak. And so if you read through the book, you would see we used a lot of interviews, so that the data would be presented in as it is, so that people can make their own judgment about the intentions of misrepresenting, if something is misrepresented, or the judgment about subjectivity. And the third question about, do we have the information about economic activities and the background? Actually, we do have, and we did register that kind of information. In relevant chapters, we provide the tables of the type of educational background, the type of the social background, the length of the stay of a particular individual, etc. So we were trying to show the background of the respondent, and then to present their story, so that the one who is reading this would know better about what kind of conditions these people are talking about. And also in the chapters by Dr. Saipov, there is an outline of what kind of part-time jobs these people are getting engaged in, what kind of income they're getting, and how much they're using it for remittances and things like that. So in that particular sense, we tried to reflect fully on the the information that we had. Mukaddam?
Thank you. So regarding this last question on what they do for a living, in the chapters 4 to 6, we didn't we give a general outline of what they do, but we don't go into details again because of confidentiality, because there are 30 respondents, and we give locations, age, a visa type, and if we gave everything in details, it would be possible to trace the person and lose anonymity, confidentiality of respondents. So the general outlines in those chapters are there. And regarding Professor Insebayeva's question, I had some interview. One of my respondents, actually, we had a 2-day session with the respondents, and on the first day we decided to get to know each other. And on the first day, without any recording, the respondent decided to put out everything that the person was going through in Japan. like everything from the beginning till the end, worries, anxieties, challenges, and what they want to do. But on the next day, where we agreed on recording, the story was really compact, with lots of details just lost. And that was one of the challenges in getting true information, you know, especially when you know that there is more to that and you don't have that consent, although you know the story of the respondent. And there were some interviews which I discarded, which took like 10 minutes. And just because of recording again. And then once you turn off the recorder, it goes on and on and on. That's it, thank you. And especially regarding the last one I forgot to mention, we didn't sort the respondents by their economic status because we were open and encouraging as much variety of experiences as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Shafiqullah Yusufzai.
Yes, my question is that almost all data is collected from the Tokyo and the Ibaraki prefecture. So, how we can say that the results are consistent? My question is most relevant to the sampling of interviewers across Japan, because maybe most of the Uzbek nationals are living in Tokyo and Ibaraki, or they didn't include those interviewers from other prefectures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a question regarding where this research can be found. So if you could repeat where the interested participants can download the book. And also, if I may, I have a question myself. I was wondering about the novelty of research because migration has been studied quite a lot in different regions of the world, as you mentioned, and the religious dimension of migration, the sojourning, has also been studied in different contexts. So I was wondering what's unique about this research and why do we need to know about the Uzbek experience in Japan? Thank you.
Mukaddam, would you like to start answering and then I'll take it from there?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Would you like to start answering? Or?
Yeah, I'm fine. So as for Tokyo and Ibaraki, I believe this is only these 3 chapters of the book that have this sampling. As for Tokyo, I can say that it's mostly the work visa holders because most of the job opportunities for foreigners stem from central areas of Japan as Tokyo and Osaka. And as for Ibaraki, it's mostly the international students. There are several maybe centers for international students in Japan, especially for Uzbekistani. And one of them is Ibaraki. So that's for the international students and working individuals part mostly. And as for the novelty of research, there are actually not many studies which deal with sojourning experiences or settling experiences of people in terms of the process itself. And most of the studies in sojourning are psychological studies, which deal with adaptation and adjustment of sojourners in their respective countries. And as for extensive studies on sojourners, most of them, they take this sojourning as a static category and measure sojourning by legal status of residents. And there are actually surprisingly no mention of, for example, gender or religion or identity, for that matter, in the sojourning studies. And furthermore, most of those extensive studies deal with American context. It's either most of the sojourning studies are based on Chinese cases in the US, the mainland US and Hawaii, and or Israeli in the US. And as for the categories of migrants, of sojourners in those studies, it's mostly lower skilled migrants. Like, for example, in the study that started sojourning studies, it's Chinese laundrymen in the US, or Chinese, the first generation Chinese who migrated to Hawaii and with no, for example, if we consider to Uzbekistani in Japan in our studies, which are educated, which worked in their countries and which were not forced to go to Japan as compared to some other studies. I hope this answers. Thank you.
Just to add a few things, firstly about the the first question about the sample. Well, we do not claim that this current sample is covering all types of activities. What we were trying to do is to grasp as diverse sample as we can. And so, the sample that Mukaddam was talking about is, part of it. In the second sample, we have, coverage which is much larger. It goes all the way to, Aichi prefecture, and then, Fukuoka and other sort of, areas. In addition, as I've already said, this is an ongoing study. So we're trying to grasp, more and more areas and more types of activities. But again, we're not looking at the numbers or a representation of all areas in Japan. We're looking at the representation of the types of migration experiences, and I think that's the most important part of what we're trying to do. Now, in terms of the novelty, I think this question needs to be asked and answered. It's very important to outline how do we position this work within this broader field of academic study on migration. And we need to divide this into two types. One, we do have a large number of works published on migration in Japan, and so there is a lot written on Nikkei community. We have international students' life experiences in Japan. We have studies on European and US migrants, which are the upper sort of higher skilled migrants. We also have studies on Koreans who are considered to be diaspora, although they know no other country than Japan, and so they are the second or third generation of the Koreans who are here to settle. So there is that kind of group of studies which focus on the traditional sort of migrants, or the old migrants, I would say. And then but in our case, we're trying to bring in the example of new migrants, and as Mukaddam correctly said, non-Caucasian and non-English speaking, and coming from the parts of Asia which are not well represented in Japan. And so this provides this novelty in terms of the sample, the new sort of empirical data that needs to be integrated into existing one. The second sort of bigger group of studies focuses on Central Asian migration elsewhere, not necessarily to Japan. And we do have a great number of works on Russia. I mean, the migration of Central Asians to outbound migration of minorities, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Migration as a result of the Tajik civil war, and pushing people outside. Then you would also have a great number of comparative studies of Central Asian migrants to East European migrants. Also very interesting perspectives. There are studies which are focusing on transnational migration and translocal migrations, and among the studies which we really sort of traced were the studies by our own Tsukuba graduate Sherzod, excuse me, family name. Yeraliyev, yes, who is now with the university in Finland, also working on migration of Central Asians in Russia, and also Rustanjon Urimboyev, one of the pioneers in the studies of migration. But again, their empirical data comes from the Russian experiences, and so what we're trying to add to the Central Asian migration studies is to bring these East Asian examples to show that there is this the new phenomenon going on. In terms of concept, so empirically, obviously, there is a case to be made, for the Central Asian migration to East Asia. But there is also conceptual, contribution to be made. And, for many of the studies, the migration is treated as a static phenomenon. The definitions which are given is that, people travel because they want to have better lives and they want to move on. It's a one-sided sort of story. And so there is no, contribution from the ethnicity, religiosity, and gender. So that is the part that we're trying to fill in. And the part that Mukaddam mentioned already, what we're trying to do, we took this example of sojourning as a theoretical concept. And this concept has been with us, from 1950s, but it has mostly referred to marginalized communities, using the cases of Chinese elsewhere or Japanese in Australia, and the students coming from developed countries to developed countries, or the migrants coming from countries like China at the stage of developing sort of economies to the US. In our case, we're using this sample to demonstrate how Central Asian migrants come to Japan at the times when Japan is not doing economically well. So, and this is something that is very interesting, because in most of the migration studies, we see that that migrants move towards the countries where economy is booming. Well, we don't actually have that in Japan, but nevertheless, we see the opportunities which are filled by Central Asian migrants. And so in our adaptation of sojourning, there are three things that we emphasize. First, we treat sojourning as a very sort of fluid and unsettled concept. It really depends on subjectivity and the way one sort of digests this notion according to his or her own socioeconomic conditions. The second, we depart and question the criteria for measuring sojourning only by using time and legal status. We suggest that sojourning can also be ideational or identity-based concept. And the third, we try to contribute, not only question the fact that time and legal status cannot be the only factors. We try to demonstrate how religiosity and ethnicity can contribute to this, depicting temporary stay or sojourning as a fluid and very sort of context dependent category in migration studies. So I think that would be the contribution as a study. And the second part of your question about, so what is what differentiates Uzbek migration from others in Japan? I mean, why do we have to look into Uzbek migration when compared to others? And I think here again, there are certain points that we would like to emphasize in our study. We feel that firstly, we cannot generalize upon Uzbek migration in general. The types of the motivations and the way people sort of analyze their own, or self-reflect on their own stay in Japan really depends on the social economic background, the areas where they are coming from and where they are going to return. So we are not trying to generalize upon that. We provide particular examples of conditions. So we actually provide the conditionalities which lead to a certain type of thinking. But in terms of condition or peculiarities of Uzbek stay, I would say it's a lack of desire to settle permanently. And I think this is something that differentiates them from other ethnic groups. We actually found the examples of ethnic groups in Japan who live in both societies. They live in Japan, at the same time they live in their own society. So this is a kind of transnational migration where people reside in both societies. In our case, in our sample, we don't see that. In our sample, people live in their own society. So for them, Japan is just the place to permanently gain social or financial rewards that can be then sort of utilized back home. Now, religiosity, the notion of musafirchilik and etc. A very important contribution. In Russian case, Urimboyev actually provided this, provided certain reflections on musafirchilik. But in Russian case, we actually see a great number of diasporas, a great number of mosques, and Muslim communities there. So the context is a bit different, when compared to Japan. Japan, you don't have so many Muslims. You don't have so many, religious influences that our sample is exposed to. And I think that actually impacts their thinking. The role of Uzbekness, is already narrated by Mukaddam. Also, very important contribution. This has not been provided up to now. We don't actually have examples when people would have similar concepts to Japaneseness and would use this as a translational tool for understanding of why they are treated differently from others. And importance of return, already talked about it, and attempt to generate social remittances. I think these are the aspects that we feel provides conceptual novelty to our case when compared to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could you just repeat where the participants can download the book?
Yes. So the book is, well, by definition, this is pre-publication seminar. So, the book is planned to be published in early April. And we are, just completed the proofs. So, hopefully it will be published. Well, it is paywalled, but, if the good side about, books these days is that each chapter can be downloaded separately. So if you visit the website of Palgrave and the page for the series of history and politics in Central Asia, you would be able to gain access. But again, in early April, not yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dadabaev and Dr. Akhmedova. Our time is up. We have a couple of more minutes. Before we wrap up, I would like to remind everyone that next week on January 24th, we have another lecture by Dr. Sinat Sultanaliyeva, who is a Central Asian researcher at the Human Rights Watch, and she will speak on the women's rights movement in Kyrgyzstan. The event will take place at the same time from 12:15 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. And if you have already registered to this event via Zoom, you will receive a reminder and access to that event as well. And in case you have any questions, you can address them to me. You can find my email address on the poster, the promotional poster that will be posted shortly. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we're excited to see you again next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.